Hi viewers, in this video I'm going to talk about a tool named Vagrant. It's going to be a quick start guide to a command line tool named Vagrant, and we'll see a few hands-on commands and working conditions of Vagrant for you to get a better understanding of how to get some use out of this tool, this awesome tool named Vagrant. So, what is Vagrant, first of all? It's a command line tool to manage virtual machines. Simply put, that's what it is, right? So, virtual machines, another name for virtual machines is the hypervisor. So, if you have worked with these softwares like VirtualBox, VMware, or Hyper-V, you know what is a virtual machine is. And if you haven't, I guess you should first try to get yourself acquainted and familiarize yourself with those tools to see what a virtual machine is. Simply put, a virtual machine is a virtualization layer uh, on top of your machine's hardware, so that a virtual machine can kind of bring a guest operating system on top of your host operating system while sharing the same physical hardware. But virtually, the virtual machines will make sure the guest operating system look at those physical hardware as its own hardware, even though it's sharing. So this technology enables things like when you run your host operating system, which means the operating system that you run on your physical hardware, say it is Windows, with a virtual machine software or a hypervisor like VirtualBox, you'll be able to run Ubuntu or any other Linux distribution or some supported operating system on top of the virtual machine, and giving that complete isolation of that operating system within the framework of the virtual machine, giving the complete hardware virtualization. So, what is Vagrant? Vagrant is simply a command line tool to manage such virtual machines. So, it helps build and distribute virtual machines, virtual environments for easy, you know, creation and packaging and having the same environment shipped to multiple different purposes. So, for example, think about a scenario where you are developing an application, and especially when that application has quite a lot of dependencies and other system softwares to be installed. What you might typically do is you set up an operating system in which you want to develop that software, and then you manually go on installing the necessary dependencies and set up your environment so that it's ready for you to develop, and then you start developing it. Think about a scenario where you lose that laptop for whatever reason, you change that laptop, then all your development tasks that you have been doing until that point, such as installing the necessary software, dependencies, and everything, will need to be redone in your newer machine. So imagine a benefit of, let's say, having one of such machines or the environment that you have configured already saved somewhere, and when you want to rebuild that environment, it's just a matter of running one single command. That's exactly what Vagrant does. So basically, you can create development environments, reusable development environments, so that you can repopulate the same environment in the same way or in the same state again and again, with once you have the packages saved somewhere. So that's what Vagrant is. So there with that said, I don't think we need any other explanation to explain why Vagrant is important. It is a great tool, in fact, so I have been using this tool for some time now, And of course, some of these functionalities can now be done or accomplished with containers as well. But Vagrant gives more hardware virtualization aspect as well, rather than sharing the same, uh, hardware as in layers, rather than just providing software virtualization. It also provides hardware virtualization with virtual machines. Of course, Vagrant can also work with Docker, like container platforms as well. So that is not the focus for this video. So today's focus is on getting ourselves a little comfortable with Vagrant so that you can get started very quickly. Okay, so to really make use of Vagrant, you better install Git. And if you're a developer, you probably already have Git installed. So I'm not gonna teach you on how to install Git. And for this demonstration, for this video purpose, you better have VirtualBox installed as well, which is a free and open source virtualization environment or hypervisor uh, from Oracle as well. So you can download and install that. VMware is another virtualization environment or hypervisor you can use. If you have a license, you are free to use that as well. But the steps that I show here is for VirtualBox, but you should be able to map for any other hypervisor as well. And of course, you need to have Vagrant installed. So let's see how to install Vagrant. So installation of Vagrant depends on your operating system. So if I'm using a Mac, so you can install it with Brew Package Manager. If you're using a Linux environment, for various different Linux environments, the instructions are provided here. You can do that. Of course, for Windows, you have binaries that you can download and install as well. So assuming that you have Vagrant installed, and yeah, so you can easily figure out if the Vagrant is installed using Vagrant v command, which should show you the Vagrant version. So I'm using Vagrant 2.3.3. Fine. So let's quickly go back to our presentation, and I'll just come back to uh, this view. So when you're working with Vagrant, you need to know about this particular file called Vagrant file. So let's say you have a project that you want to now create a new development environment. Typically, you will start off with what we call as a Vagrant file, right? You will create that file in some form in a text editor, or in fact, the Vagrant tool has a way to automatically get this file created with a command. We'll look at that. So anyway, what this Vagrant file contains is certain instructions on how to configure your virtual machine. Simply put, that it's a Ruby file. Ruby is a programming language, and the instructions that you see in Vagrant will be in Ruby, the language Ruby. So I'll be using this particular uh, file or some modified version of this file for my demonstration purpose. So basically, this we'll look at what does this say later on in our video. And but you should be able to see something around Ubuntu, VirtualBox, and things, and memory being set, the name being set, all that, right? And there are certain other things that we can look at it while we go for the test. Okay, uh, so in this video, we'll also be looking at some of the Vagrant commands, some popular commands. These are not just what you have with Vagrant. There are a lot more commands and stuff that you can do with Vagrant, but these are the most commonly used commands. So you will, most probably the one most useful and the important command is the one that you see at the top, the Vagrant up command. And there are other commands that we'll be looking at as well. So we'll come to that. So the other important one, probably the one that we'll start off with, is this Vagrant init. minus m. So we'll come to the other stuff. So let's get back to business now with our commands. So let me copy this and go back to my command line. So I'm in a particular folder, right? So you can create a test folder if you want to. Let's say my dev environment. So I'll go into that. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say vagrant init minus m ubuntu jammy 64, and this is something that I'm going to create. So let's give some time for it to. Right. So the command has been completed. So it says the Vagrant file has been placed in this directory. You are now ready to Vagrant up your first virtual environment. Please read the comments in the Vagrant file as well as documentation of vagrant.com for more information for that. Now, if you just go into this, you see this one single file has been created. So this command doesn't do anything really important, but it just creates this Vagrant file with this content. So it just says vagrant.configure to, and it says the box is this. So basically, you can rather create this file with this content manually as well. So the command just helps you with bootstrapping this file uh, to give you a good start to work on this vagrant file. Yeah, so that's a great way to start. So now what we can do with this? So it's also says already now we are ready to run the vagrant up command. We can do that. So let's see what happens when we do the vagrant up command. And I'm going to run the vagrant up command, and this should uh, now start rolling out with reading the instructions in the vagrant file and creating the necessary uh, details. So as you can see, it says initially importing the base box and checking if the version is up to date, all that. And this could take a few minutes because if you don't have the Ubuntu Jammy 64 VirtualBox box, in fact, in Vagrant's term, this is called a box, available in your platform, in your machine, it's going to download over the internet uh, on this. I believe I have this, so let's wait for a few seconds to see what's going to happen. Okay, so it just completed, but you see a few stuff running around here. And typically you would see downloading Ubuntu Jammy 64. In my case, it doesn't show that because I already happen to have that in my machine. I'll show you how do I have it and how do I know that I have it, all that. And after that, it's obviously saying clearing my previous set network interfaces, preparing network interfaces, forwarding certain ports, and then it says booting the virtual machine and waiting for the virtual machine to boot. This may take a couple of minutes, and then it just gives me a few details of SSH username and all that, and then inserting generated key, public key within the guest, and then machine booted and ready, right? So that means the machine is ready. Now I'm running this in a Mac OS, and what I just did was like, okay, I had a box name Ubuntu slash Jammy 64, and which is from which I just set Vagrant up, and this should have uh, my virtual machine up and running. I have VirtualBox already installed. This won't work if you don't have VirtualBox, right? So, or any other virtual machine for in case you are using. So in my case, I'm using VirtualBox version 7, as you can see here. And yeah, let's me just quickly show you my VirtualBox thing. So you see a number of other virtual machines that I have already, and this is exactly what it just created, and my dev env and just gave it a default name. I just picked it by default. You can customize all that with the Vagrant file, and that's the purpose of the Vagrant file. Of course, you see with the VirtualBox there are other details like the basic based memory, the processors, video memory, and different other stuff and settings. If you go into the settings section, you see various different settings, display settings, shared folder settings, and all that. So you see already there's one folder shared, which is here, and which is what is mentioned here as well. Mounting the shared folders, Vagrant folder is shared to this particular location, right? But you can also do certain sharing manually in the VirtualBox UI, or else you can also do it in the Vagrant file, Ruby file as well. So let's go back here, and now I want to get into that virtual, operating system, which is Ubuntu. How do I do that? So basically, I can say Vagrant SSH. When I go into Vagrant SSH, you are you will be taken into that particular virtual machine using SSH protocol. And as you can see, the details are shown here, various details, and you can find out my current user is Vagrant, and I'm in the home directory called slash Vagrant. Now you are on a Mac OS. You are now connected to Ubuntu guest operating system using SSH. Typically, uh, you would normally connect to a remote machine in a typical remote development machine. Now you can do whatever you like. For example, you can install your required softwares and all that. You can do that. So I'm not going to do it right now. And of course, once you do it, let's say you can install sudo apt-get. Let's say I install Python, for example, Python or Python 3. Just look into what you want and you can install it. And once you install it, you will have the necessary packages ready. And now your environment is ready, and you exit out of your uh, terminal. But now you can see whether your on the particular folder you can enter Vagrant status to see the status of your virtual machine that's running. So in this case, it should say the virtual machine is in running state, and as you can see, it says running. Of course, it also says to stop this virtual machine you can run Vagrant halt, and let's do that, and it should bring my machine to a shutdown state. And after that, we can run the Vagrant status once again to see whether the virtual machine is running. And also you can see that it also gives you an option to Vagrant suspend, to simply suspend the virtual machine. So which means whatever applications that's running in your operating system, guest operating system, when you were suspending, when you bring that up once again with Vagrant up command, we'll have it running. Basically, you just suspended the entire uh, operating system as if you just do a normal machine suspension. As you can see now, after the Vagrant halt, it's powered off. And yeah, so that's very simple, right? So now we looked at Vagrant up command, Vagrant SSH command, Vagrant halt command, and let's also try to see Vagrant global status. And we'll come to this destroy ID and box list commands and so forth. So we also looked at this one, and Vagrant box remove ID. Right. So let's use this command now quickly, and let's try to see what's happening there. So when you hit that, it should show basically wherever you are in your for example, different stuff, right? For example, as you saw earlier in my VirtualBox UI, there are a number of other virtual machines, and so all of those virtual machines that are under the purview of the Vagrant are listed here, and its status is also uh, displayed here as well for your reference. So you don't need to be under the particular directory. And if you're under the directory and if you just say Vagrant status, it will just get the status of the virtual machine that's been controlled by the Vagrant file of that particular directory, but the global status will bring the entire thing for you. Fine. So let me bring the Vagrant up again, right? So just to show you one small variation of work that I want to do. So this should bring this particular machine up in a while. And once you have that, for example, now you see it's starting and running now, right? So now the name looks a bit ugly, and the memory also is something that I want to change. You can do this in the UI, but I'm going to show you how to do this in um, with the Vagrant file, right? So once we have this, let's do that. And yeah, it's going to take some time until it really comes up. Okay, so it's back up. So let's open the Vagrant file. And one thing that I can do is now this file, I'm going to paste this entry here. So simply it says provide a virtual box and do this configuration. And I'm going to say and give a different name because I already have that name here. Let's say my dev that, and the memory is something maybe I'm gonna say 2048 and save this file. So I made the change and saved it. Of course, that change won't get reflected until I do a restart of my virtual machine. So to do the restart, instead of what I can do is I can halt it and then come back with Vagrant up. Or else you can also do Vagrant reload, as you can see here. So so this command is gonna reread the Vagrant file for you and then apply those changes that's been added to the Vagrant file to the virtual machine. So it will basically do the same thing as Vagrant halt and then Vagrant up. The Vagrant up will read the Vagrant file once again and then do the work for you. So let's also look at this Vagrant box list command. But before we come there, let's quickly look at some important directories. So by default, you have to look at this vagrant.d boxes directory and the VirtualBox VMs directory in your home directory. And the local project directory where the Vagrant file is located, of course, that's important because that's where you have uh, your Vagrant file, right? So now it's started. So let's look at our this thing. Now, obviously, it looks much fine here, and you see the base memory has been changed to 2048 as is reflected in the Vagrant file as well. Fine. So let's look at the default directories here. The ones that I wanted to show you to you is this vagrant.d directory. So if you just go here, you see a number of other directories here. The most important one inside that is this boxes folder, in which it will show you a lot of vagrant boxes that you have been using in your projects, your different development environments that you have in your case. So for it's basically not the development environments, it's actually the boxes, the base boxes that you are using in your project. For example, in my case, I'm for this particular my dev virtual machine, I'm using this base box, Ubuntu Jammy 64, and this is something that Vagrant inserts by default to make it's a naming convention that it uses to manage its own metadata related to these different boxes. So basically this folder contains all the base boxes that you are using in your machine to form various development environments. The other important directory is the VirtualBox thing, and of course you now see there are four machines up here. So there's a couple of other stuff that is being there. Certain things might be missing here. So that's because you haven't destroyed it properly. and that's what that destroy command is for. And now you see your virtual machine here, and you also see other virtual machines here and so forth. But VirtualBox supports storing these virtual machine files in different locations in your host machine, and but by default Vagrant uses this particular directory, and that's why you only see four out of it. And I of course had some other virtual machines stored in some other locations in the in my environment as well. Right, so that's an important thing to know about it. So, okay, so now let's also quickly run through these other commands. So, vagrant box list, let's do that. And vagrant box list, it's going to list all the boxes that you have in your uh, vagrant environment, and that's what it is for. So basically, it's like you have just viewed the vagrant d/boxes directory, right? So it's just going to show you the ones that you have. Your base boxes will be shown here, right? So you can destroy a particular uh, let's see, now in this case, now vagrant status should read up, so I'm gonna hold it. Let's say you wanted to delete this a particular uh, file with the box. You can say vagrant destroy and give the ID of your for example, you can give this particular ID to take it off. That means the box will be removed from your machine. So I don't want to do that, so I'll leave it as such, so you can play around those commands as well. Right, so this is a very straightforward. So there's one more command, very important command that you need to know is the vagrant package command. Right, so vagrant package. So before we go on to that, let's try to install a software so that we will understand what it means. Okay, of course, for that I will have to have my machine up and running as well. So in vain, I just halted that. Okay, so while that's coming up, so let's have a look at some of the important stuffs related to some default actions. Now, what happens now? You saw when the vagrant up command was run, there are various ports being opened, various other things being mounted. For example, default directories being mounted. So those are some default action that happens. Of course, you can modify those things as well. For example, vagrant opens this port 2222 on your host and 22 on the guest host for SSH purposes. So that's why when you do the Vagrant SSH, you are able to just log into your guest operating system. Also, it auto mounts the directory where the Vagrant file is, and you saw that. And and of course the default SSH username and password is vagrant and vagrant. You can change that password, and I will leave those exercises to you to look in the internet, and you figure out how to do that thing. You can also change the default public cert and key because we didn't have one vagrant generated one for us. But if you're just doing a local development and you want a consistent development environment, you don't need to bother about creating new public cert and key. But if you are doing it in an enterprise scale and you want to distribute all these things, you might want to consider having proper public cert keys uh, to protect your uh, environment, especially if you are hosting this in another remote machine. And then within that remote machine, you are having this environment so that others can work on it. And there can be various different use cases uh, for you. Okay, so let's come back. Okay, so now I'm gonna do Vagrant SSH once again and do the installation of, let's say, sudo apt-get install Python. Okay, there is no installation called Python, maybe Python 3. Um, okay, so that means the Python 3 is already in the install state. Okay, so that means Python is already installed. So let's try to do, yeah, so give me a second on this. Okay, so for example, if you're developing in C, C++, you will probably want GCC. I'm not sure whether it is not there. Yeah, GCC is not there. G++ is not there. The reason I wanted to check that was because I'm going to install it. So one way to install that is, of course, we can try GCC, and I'm going to say yes. Okay, so it's gonna download that. Gonna take some time. I'm not sure it says no. Uh, the IP address is not found. So wait. So I'm for our purpose. We can also uh, do quite a lot of installation called these build essentials. Let's see if that works. Maybe to Okay, we might have to update our sudo, which we haven't done here, which I don't want to do here in this case. Let me try to do. Um, my purpose is to just to demonstrate this. So let me see. So let's try to install autoconf tool. If this also does the same, then we might have to update Ubuntu as well. Okay, this time it went off. So for example, autoconf is a tool that I just installed. For example, now you see autoconf and automake other commands, and I'm not here to explain you what those commands do. The purpose is to show the packaging. Now I just installed that particular uh, package in Ubuntu, so I'm going to exit this and then want to run this particular command, Vagrant package output example, right? So this is going to package uh, yeah, of course that box is not available. It says the machine with the name output was not found configured for this Vagrant environment. Let's run this box, and this time it says the same. Let's see what's the cause of this. Okay, so the reason is quite silly here. So um, I think the reason was because I missed. Um, this should be a double slash here, and I'm gonna name this my awesome dev box. So this is gonna create a package called. So it's gonna shut down. Because it's running, it's gonna shut down and then create a box out of the image or the snapshot of your particular environment that's there right now. So why is this important is this box that you create, my awesome div box, is something that you can distribute, and anyone who gets that box and create a virtual environment or virtual machine will have that autoconf package installed by default. How cool is that? That's a great way of working, right? And yeah, so that's pretty cool. And let's wait for this box to get created. And there are a few other commands that I want to show you, and few other things that I want to list. Um, and yeah, and after that we can wind up this particular video quite easily. Fine. So now I have this particular box. Look at the size of the file. Of course, that's a huge size because it's an operating system, right? So now you can use this box to create a uh, new virtual machine from that. So let me first delete the current virtual machine that is there, which I don't want. And to do that, we can do a couple of things here. So of course, I can say Vagrant destroy. And if I do the destroy, are you sure you want to destroy the default VM? Yes. And so this particular, now if I just ask for the status, uh, it says not created because it's not created based out of this current Vagrant file that is there. So if you go back here, you should see that my dev in there. So that is not there. And of course, you should not see in the virtual machines folder as well. So you had 4 before and now you don't have it, and you only have these things that we have created. Perfect. Right. So now how do I create a virtual machine out of this particular box? That's an important thing to know as well. Okay, so up until this point, what we did was we created a new box from a base box, right? And this is typically done by a system engineer or a DevOps person, right? And if you're a developer and wants to use this thing, and you will have to use this particular box to create your virtual environment and start developing, right? So before we go there, there's one additional thing. So we already saw this particular command, Vagrant box. It's already listing all the base boxes. I want to add my awesome dev.box to the base box list as well. So let's do that. And the first thing to do is to do that, we can say Vagrant box add. I can say my dev using my dev box. So let's add that. So it's going to add that box, of course. So then you list it again. You should see my dev box here. Then, of course, now starting this particular box means quite an easy thing to do now. Okay, of course, to do that, I need to go into a new directory. I'm going to create that because I need to create a new Vagrant file with that. So to do that, you're going to say Vagrant init -m, and you're going to say my dev. This is your box, and it's going to create a Vagrant file with your my dev box, of course. And now if you say Vagrant, uh, sorry, up, this should now import the base box my dev, which is already there, so it won't get downloaded. And yeah, so now see the virtual machine is coming up and doing all those default port forwardings, and then you know SSH creation, the passwords for SSH and all that, private key, public key settings, default ones, and shared folders. Right, so all done. So I'm going to go to Vagrant SSH. This should let me into my new box. Let me try to see whether autoconf is installed. Of course, it is installed, as you can see, and which was not there by default in the base box. So this is the power of Vagrant, and a cool way of doing it. So one final thing that I want to mention before winding up is this concept called provisioning. So what is provisioning? So provisioning is a fancy name that is used in the Vagrant world to mean installing necessary packages automatically instead of manually. Now, in my previous demo, we installed AutoConf tool manually. So you downloaded the base box, you brought the virtual machine up, you SSH into the machine, and then you installed the AutoConf, and then you packaged it as another box, and then used it as a developer, and all good. So the step that you carried out was done manually. But that step, instead of doing manually, you can do it automatically in a script, using a script. So this can be done using a shell script or other tools such as what we call as configuration management systems or configuration management tools such as Puppet, Chef, and Ansible, if you have heard of those tools. So my intention is not to cover Puppet, Chef, and Ansible because is that will require another video to teach about those things. But to explain shell scripts, so using shell scripts, you can do the installation as well. So, for example, to do that, you can, for example, open up. So you have this Vagrant file here. I'll go back to my original Vagrant file, which is this one for the base box. And let's say you have something called dir build or install package.sh. Uh, I'm sorry, I think I just created a new directory name that, and let's say I'm going to create a new file instead. And here you can basically say all that you installed as well. Git install, uh, maybe GCC, for example. You can have this command mentioned here. And now you need to refer this particular file in the Vagrant file, right? So that's the only way the Vagrant would know. How do you do that? So the way to do that is using this a command called, or let's say open the Vagrant file, and under this section um, you can add this config.vm shell path, and you can give install package just.sh. So when you do this thing, and for the first time that you start the Vagrant app, once the virtual machine has come up, it's going to run that install packages or install package. I mean, that script file will run for you, just like you run that script file within the virtual machine, and all that happens automatically. And let's say if you want to make that script file run once again after you have started the Vagrant up command, you can also issue Vagrant provision command. So what will that do is basically, without doing anything fancy about the virtual machine, it will rerun that particular script file within the virtual machine if you have made certain changes within that. Fine. I think this is a very brief start on using Vagrant. I hope you have realized the power of Vagrant and the kind of things that you can do with this tool quite easily. So I recommend you to explore this further. And I hope you enjoy the video very well. And subscribe to my channel below for more videos like this. And to get notifications, click the bell button. And I'll see you in another day. Thank you very much.